Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for coming back. I appreciate that. I'm Gabriel Lomas. I am a professor of counseling at Gallaudet. I am also the program director for that particular program, and I'm excited to be here with you all today. I want to tell you a little bit about my background, my history, and then my co-presenter, Grace, will give you a little intro about herself, too. So I'm a native Texan. I was born and raised in San Antonio. Anybody from San Antonio? Yay, we got a few people, yay. I was born to a hard of hearing mom. She was profoundly deaf in one ear and could hear pretty well out of the other ear. But we have some deaf extended family members, so I was exposed to sign language as a child and kind of made it my career. I worked as an interpreter. I was not a very good interpreter, I don't think, when I look back, but I worked as an interpreter for a little while when I was in college, just to make some spending money. And then I went to UT San Antonio, and then I went to grad school at Lamar. I studied deaf education. But while I was there at Lamar was when I had a renewed interest in psychology. So I went to Gallaudet, got a master's in counseling, and while I was there, I also met my wife. And the two of us, got married, and we started, we came to Texas, came back to where I grew up, and I continued to work as a counselor for a deaf and hard of hearing program in Southwest Houston, the Fort Bend, Brazoria Deaf and Hard of Hearing program. Anybody here from that program? Maybe online? So I worked there for a while, and while I was there, I continued my academic work, and I got a doctorate in counseling with a focus in school psychology. And after I got licensed, I began to work in Houston, both at the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program, and then I taught at the University of Houston. And while I was there I taught at their Clear Lake campus. And while I was there, I saw the need for clinical services, and I opened up a private practice that I called the Houston Center for Mental Health and Deafness. And we served deaf clients out of that office. I called all my friends who knew sign language and who were deaf, and I tried to coordinate services for the region through that office. And what ended up happening was I had an amazing supervisor, a person who supervised my clinical work, and he helped me to really grow my clinical experience and my practice. So we had contracts with Child Protective Services, with CPS, and with the Sheriff's Department, Adult Probation, a lot of different forensic agencies. So over about a 9-year period, I was averaging anywhere between 2 to 4 evaluations per week. So over the 9 years that I did that, I easily did over 2,000 evaluations for different forensic agencies. So that experience really informs my work, the work that we're going to talk about today. And even though I was really excited to help people to find justice, there's upsides and downsides to finding justice, and so we'll talk a little bit about that today. Before I continue on, I want to introduce my co-presenter, Grace. I'll let her, introduce herself. Go ahead, Grace.
Great, perfect. So thank you. We can do the next slide to introduce myself. My name is Grace. This is my name sign. I'm a student. I'm from Chicago. I'm in my master's, getting my master's in social work. So met him at Gallaudet as my undergraduate studies. I'm also a student there. So hold on, can we find that? Oh, there we go. There's the slide, perfect. I am a late deafened individual. I lost my hearing in middle school. Also, at that early time in high school, I had a very close friend who was incarcerated, and that's how I really got into this field. I've studied about justice, the legal system, and prison system, et cetera, so I have some secondhand experiences with partners in intervention program, PIP. I'm interning now at Chicago. Hold on. Okay, I'm current intern in Chicago through my master's program, and I'm interning with the Chicago Apple ID, which is an organization for justice and fairness in the system, for how we can improve in the criminal justice system. So access for deaf individuals there. My undergraduate, some of those research courses were with Dr. Lomas, and so had an opportunity to study deaf individuals, adults who were formerly incarcerated and in prison. So that is where I'm drawing some of my research from and what I've done for a while. So eager to share more of my information with you.
Here are our learning objectives. So in the prior slide, there was a little picture of a book cover from a book that I worked on that was published in 2021 with Gallaudet Press, Deaf People in the Justice System. I was one of the editors of that book. I also had a solo chapter in that book that talks about some of the problems, some of the challenges that we have with deaf youth getting into the justice system. They call the school-to-prison nexus, or the school-to-prison pipeline. So we're going to talk about that today. And then also, Grace will expand on some of her research that has themes about formerly incarcerated deaf adults. And then you guys are going to work together to help us to identify strategies. We have a few already, but I think we want you guys to work on some Texas-specific strategies for disrupting that school-to-prison pipeline.
And I'd also like to add that throughout this presentation, I'm very open to comments or questions or anything like that. So just raise your hand. People on Zoom, if you'd like, if somebody can let us know if there's a hand up or something, we can go ahead and take those as we go, be a part of the conversation so that it's interactive throughout the presentation. So I think that most of us here are used to, this is looking in the audience here, you're all familiar with the spectrum of what it means to be deaf. I would like to emphasize that we do have about 500,000 culturally signing fluent people in the U.S. There are 11 million people who are deaf, hard of hearing. That's an additional number of people who have some sort of a hearing loss. So really, I think it's important that we continue to think of strategies to figure out how we provide language and communication for such a wide range of individuals, if it's related to identity, cultural identity, being a deaf person, or just really being able to accommodate all types of deaf people. How many of you are familiar with this term intersectionality? Okay, seeing lots of yeses and nods. Okay, great. I do like this picture here. It just shows the spectrum of privilege and oppression and how each identity is on this different spectrum. Also how things change over time. Our identity does not remain static throughout our lifetime. It does evolve and change. So figuring out how each identity interacts with each other, how that changes from day to day, depending on the environment, the type of situation. So just, specific people that are there, it's very layered. Humans are complex, and so we have different skills and different avenues of way of being successful. So this is a good reminder.
So raise your hand if you're familiar with the ACE study. Okay, kind of about half. I wanted to expand on this a little bit because it's so critical to this work that we do. ACEs stand for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And if you have not read about that, if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to Google it. There's a lot of content. There's also a wonderful YouTube video. I think it was a TED Talk done by a physician named Nadine Burke-Harris. She does a 15-minute phenomenal, presentation on what are ACEs and what's the impact of ACEs. But if we think about ACEs in general, are when a child experiences, some sort of adverse experience, while they're young, the impact that it has on adulthood. In fact, let me just quickly go back and summarize a little bit about where the ACE study came from. It was done by the Kaiser Clinic on the West Coast in California. and they had over 17,000 people in their pool. So what would happen is people would go to the doctor's office and they would fill out a survey that they had developed with just 10 questions, and they were about negative childhood experiences. For example, some of them were common, simple, like were your parents divorced, when you were a child, but many of them were much more significant, like is there somebody in your family who was incarcerated? Did you feel unloved and unconnected to your parents or to your caregivers, things like that. And what was interesting was that they found that a lot of these people who said yes to one, the more yeses that they had on this, the worse outcomes they had for their health as they grew up, right? So they found a pretty clear correlation. Now, the purpose for the Kaiser Clinic doing this was they wanted to find ways to save money on our healthcare, right? So that if we can find ways to make healthcare less expensive, then that's smart for Kaiser. The problem is that not everybody can be like, this is a middle class pool of people. If you have healthcare insurance with Kaiser, you are probably employed and working. So but still, it's an important study, for us to think about. To me, it really should be transformative. We know that if you can prevent adverse childhood experiences, then you can improve people's quality of life, right? So to me, it's profound. It's preventative care that should occur. Like, for example, I think a good comparison that I've seen before is Dr. John Snow, in London. He was identifying a lot of kids coming with stomach problems, right? And he found out that really what was happening over and over again was that there was the dirty water, the gray water was mixing with fresh water, and people were getting sick over and over again, right? So what they did was separate those in a better way, and all of a sudden people were healthier, right? So he was really, a lot of people would consider him the father of public health, the field of public health, because we began to see, like, if we can prevent illnesses, then we can give people better quality of life, and we can save money on healthcare costs. And so if we think about that with ACEs, it should also be a transformative movement too. Like, we should be able to say, like, if we can help people to have better childhoods, then we can have better quality of life as adults, and we can save money and save stress, and have people happier, right? Now, I think about ACEs, and I think, what are common ACEs that deaf kids have?
Yeah, and I also wanted to just add on to that. Those who have experienced ACEs, they are typically have contacts with the incarceration system. So if they have more than one ACE, for example, let's say maybe their parents had a disorder, used substance use disorder, for example, or let's say they had a mental illness or something. So that child was twice as likely to have some sort of contact with the prison system throughout their life. So I think it's really important to recognize that as far as the research goes, it does show that individuals who have, double, triple incidences have a more likelihood to be a part of the prison system, which again has long-term consequences and costs. The costs are pretty enormous, but also more significant consequences and additional experiences from those types of childhood things.
Okay, so the question is, I want you guys to think about a student who you knew who maybe got into some trouble. Were there ACEs involved? I'm hoping that maybe one or two of you will raise your hand and say, this is what I see in the deaf community.
Yeah, do you want me to give you some examples, or what are you looking for? So I can share a story here. I'm from Minnesota, where I work at the deaf school in Minnesota. I'm sorry, do you mind standing up so we can see you? Yes, thank you, I'm so sorry. Let me repeat myself. So okay, real quick, I can introduce myself. My name is Erin Wajed. This is my name sign. I've been in Texas for 3 years, but before that, let me share a story with you about working at the Minnesota School for the Deaf. And I worked there in the dorms, students who were residential. I was a director. There was a student who, extremely intelligent, but did get in trouble quite a bit. And so, 16 years old, so I was chatting with this student who had pretty severe language deprivation. The family had moved from Mexico, and a lot of communication challenges and issues, and so communication was really not there. Had been isolated for a long time, was getting in trouble with peers, so I was disciplining this particular student. And I was working with the teacher in the classroom trying to figure out how to incorporate this child, give us some supports. So some time went by, and this child began to communicate more. So we had a team, we had a counselor involved, quite a bit of people. It was not easy, but as time went on, this student graduated and then was imprisoned. So it was late. They did commit some sort of a crime, we think. Unfortunately, this was the case. So, family wasn't really able to understand or really connect with the child. And so when I think about the ACEs that this person experienced growing up, if the family had been able to give more supports or be more attentive, there were siblings as well, they were all hearing. This was the only deaf child in the family, really struggled in their journey, and it didn't enter the school for the deaf until high school age, so had missed a lot of life opportunities. So that really gets me thinking, and that was one of my experiences. Can I share as well? Hi there, my name is Heather. Just to add on top of that is the late or misdiagnosis or incorrect identification, basically not getting the justification that they needed sooner to find out that they have a condition. That's definitely an ACE as well.
Thank you both for sharing. I really appreciate that. What you're doing is just illustrating how common really it is, for deaf kids to have exposure to ACEs too, and yet we don't really have a system that's designed to address that. I think that when you think about the statistics, it's some researchers, it will vary a little bit, but in general, we still have this historical research that says 90% of deaf kids are born to hearing parents who know nothing about deafness and sign language, and so sometimes there are parental issues, attachment issues, things like that. And one of the ACEs is, do you feel loved? Did one of your parents hurt you? Were your parents, substance abusers, things like that. So that parental piece is really critical, very critical. And I think that really a lot of deaf kids are at risk when we think about what happens to them as they grow up, in the systems that we have. Was there more, or should we go on?
No, that was great. Yeah, next slide, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have a question.
Oh.
You know, your son's very lucky to have you advocating for him. Uh, hmm.
Strong, oh, I'm sorry. They gave him a lot, very strong medications.
Y pues se la quitaron, como le dije.
So then finally they took those
Sí le
medications,
había creado adicción,
and but he was already addicted to that, to those medications.
pero pues aquí está, gracias a Dios.
So thank God he's here with me.
No sé cómo le hicimos o no
I
sé
don't
cómo
know
le
how we
hice.
made it and how I did it, but I'm learning a lot of things from here today.
We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that you touched on there. I encourage you to meet with the two speakers that spoke before lunch. They're really your local experts on evaluation, for sure. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So let's go on.
Okay, and I also just wanted to comment earlier that I really appreciate your perspective on this. I think that we don't, go too in depth in the medical field here, but I do see lots of parallels between what you have shared about the challenges that the medical field, just lots of people who don't know how to interact with those. They don't really understand how to accommodate the needs of other people. So oftentimes we see this in the legal space as well, in the prison system. Lots of similarities happen as well, where staff who are supposed to be protecting people's rights, they don't even know what people's rights are in the first place. And I think that is a huge challenge for the individual who suffers. If they're a deaf person and they weren't exposed to knowing what their rights are, they have to figure out how they can advocate for themselves, but then the staff also just are not aware of how to have those conversations, and so the cycle continues. So thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. So I did want to kind of make some connections here with what he was talking about earlier, the study that began in the 90s. And in the 90s, they were looking back at people's lives and how their childhood was, as far as studying people who grew up in the 80s, 70s, taking a look at that. And then in our generation, too, there were lots of unique challenges. And really, we don't even know what some of those consequences are going to be and those impacts for people in the current generations. Teens who are growing up through COVID, teens who, when they grew up, they had access to everything in social media on their tablets and their devices, global crisis, war, et cetera, all of these things that previous generations did not have exposure to. They're now witnessing all of that in real time. So research is showing that those who were young and who, climate change is a big issue as well, or they're reading about, they're seeing videos, or with different technology, terminology, they're seeing about different racial and ethnic challenges that are happening around the world, and there's lots of PTSD going secondhand, PTSD, et cetera. So it's really important that we consider all of these traumas. They are not firsthand experiences to people directly, but it's things that people are seeing, witnessing. So much is happening, and they're exposed to all of that across the world, and it's all at your fingertips online. And so what are those changes and the impacts on people? There can be some positive implications. People are motivated to act. We're looking for justice in the world. There's a sense of connection, belonging in a community more than we've ever had, but there's also lots of negatives, and it can be potentially traumatic to see videos of something that happened to somebody in the world, and we want to recognize that there's lots of fear, there's lots of things, worry about the future, and so, that past generations just did not have to face.
So, yeah, some of you guys may have seen this. I see people signing that, yes, I'm familiar with this. I'm a consultant on this film called Being Michelle. Friends, the filmmaker reached out to me after we published the book, Deaf People in the Justice System, and she said, I think we're a good match for partners. And as I got to know her and I got to see her commitment to the fields, I began to work closely with her. And if you haven't seen Being Michelle, it's an amazing film. We're going to watch a clip in a little while, and it's going to discuss the impact. We're going to talk about the impact of ACEs on deaf people. So just so you have a little bit of background on what you're about to see, Michelle is a deaf person. When you see her in the film, she's an adult. And as a child, she was involved in the child welfare system. You know, she was taken away from her parents. Her mother and father were both drug addicted, and her mother revealed in the film, if you saw the whole film, that she was so addicted that she even prostituted herself so that she could gain money for drugs. So when her children were young, she had, they were early on, they were taken into custody. And so that's a system that should protect Michelle, and it should protect all deaf children, right? All children, but it's a system that failed Michelle. And so Michelle, which you'll see in the next scene, was in jail multiple times over and over and over again, and she had, again, a system failed her again. So we're going to watch a little bit as she talks about her past in the film.
Now in the court, I think it's a bogus, trumped up situation. They are looking at her past record because when she was 13 years old, a police officer released a police dog onto Michelle. And when the dog latched onto her leg and she was beating the dog, that dog is considered a police officer. So she was charged with battery on a law enforcement officer. The police officer didn't call the dog off. He just allowed the dog to stay latched to her. So that was the first charge of battery on a law enforcement officer.
What is this? How old were you? 18? 18. So you're 18? That was the first time that you were in jail? And you were in Placa. And this one is Placa. That one's Placa. All of it is Placa? Ah, Michelle. My gosh. Okay. Battery on a Leo. You don't know what that means? That is you hitting an officer. Did you hit an officer? Well, what happened?
2003, battery upon a law enforcement officer. 2004, resisting officer with violence. 2005, battery upon a law enforcement officer. 2006, aggravated battery on a police officer with a deadly weapon. 2011, felony battery in Putnam County. 2011, felony battery. Arson, willful damage to dwelling attempted in 2012.
It's just heartbreaking. I didn't know. I didn't know the other officer was there. When I swung backwards, I caught his leg, and it hurt him bad. They shot me with a taser, and I was shaking terribly bad. I couldn't move. Then they handcuffed me. Then the officers took me to court. When you came here to this courthouse, the judge, did he give you an interpreter? No. He said I was trouble. I was a lot of trouble growing up. All the time I kept coming in over and over and over. He was mad at me. Very mad. 5 years in prison.
So I'd like to get you guys to jump in a little bit and see what are the things that you noticed. Where were the systemic failures? Did you notice any ACEs there? No communication, she said.
So I think, again, the system failed her. The police, altercations with the police, something happens and then some other situation happens, it becomes what they call a pattern of, but they're missing the fact that there was no communication. There was no sit down, her Miranda rights, nothing was given to her. Was there an interpreter? Did she have access? Was there a lawyer, somebody that could address all these things? So these are the gaps, and that impacted her the rest of her life. Lack of access, lack of resources, and she was stuck. Right, very punitive. Yep, exactly. The system failed her. Can I add something too? I just wanted to say that I feel like, this is, I know it's a film. I know, I'd like to watch the whole thing, but she really had no chance to defend herself in any way. I mean, she had this knife, but it was like she couldn't say, hey, this is a misunderstanding. I can clarify a misunderstanding. There was no chance to do any of that. There was no way for her to do that. It was just, hey, here we are right in your face. There it is. There was no chance at all, no sort of an interaction or even an option.
So I'm going to comment on what she just said right there. What happened was, right, remember it started at the school? So somebody got in her face, began to yell at her. Now Michelle's deaf, so she's not hearing, she's just seeing anger. So what's the response for somebody, defend yourself? Typically when somebody has a trauma reaction, it's fight, flight, or freeze, right? So Michelle did flight, she ran. And Michelle, the film shows you that repeatedly, even as an adult, even though she's out of prison now, she still has that same sort of deep-seated, desire to protect herself, just like we all do, except that when we're in crisis, we're able to usually turn to the person and try to communicate to try to de-escalate the crisis. But she is in flight or flight mode, and so she chooses to run. So she goes and gets a knife, and she goes to the top of a bridge, and then when the police come, she puts her hands behind her and accidentally, partially strikes a police officer. So they take her down hard, and she's arrested. And if you listen closely to her arrests, they're all against police officers. She's not a dangerous person who goes out and attacks other people. It's all, and the very first one was for her hitting a police dog that was biting her. So it's over and over and over again, the system that's supposed to help Michelle hurt Michelle.
Yeah, I think I also want to talk about the cultural instances. So with Michelle, I think her name sign is this, right? She was not really receiving any explanation in the home environment about the legal system at all, and what that even means. What is a police officer? What is their job? What are they supposed to be doing? What is their role? And how do you interact with those people? How do you keep yourself safe? So I'm not sure what had happened after she had the interaction with the dog, but the police as a dog, I feel like, my gut's telling me that she probably went home and there was no explanation of even what had happened for years probably. So looking back on that experience, it never made sense to her. She knew that there was violence connected to the police, and every time she saw a police person, she was afraid because of that trauma. And that was a trigger for her repeatedly. And so that, with no explanation, no context, no communication, she didn't have that understanding of what her rights are, for example, in the courtroom. As a youth, she went in with a judge, and the judge said, we're not giving you an interpreter, and she just sat back. I mean, maybe thought she was a bad kid, or she felt the judge was mad at her, and so she had rights at that point to communication access. But all these different instances happened, again, situations with the police, no interpreter, being in the courtroom, not having an advocate, not having a home life where there was any kind of communication or explanation, no deaf peers, no mentors, nothing like that was in place for her.
I mean, the legal system can be very intimidating, and like Grace said, there was no interpreter provided, and I wasn't there. I don't know exactly how that played out, but I anticipate that Michelle saw that there was no interpreter provided and felt like, well, you have the power, I don't have any power, so I'm just going to try to accept this and see what happens. So she, went on through that system without an interpreter and didn't understand the system, didn't know what was going on with her. Right.
Right.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of ignorant, but is there a law that says you're supposed to have an interpreter?
Yeah, the ADA requires that every agency that provides that gets any kind of government funding, so that
Right.
courthouse, the police, any kind of government-funded agency, including some non-governmental as well, but really in this case, any government agency is required. And this does not exempt prisons either. Prisons are also obliged to follow the ADA.
So they were
That's right.
breaking the law.
They were, the law,
So they
the
should have
courthouse.
They
the-
should have
Yes.
been in jail, not Michelle.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and also, like I was saying a minute ago, the comment that this person had shared in the back, when staff who are running the environment, they're not even aware of the rights of individuals, and then the person themselves, they're being punished or disciplined, and they are forced into a specific environment, they don't know what their rights are as well. So there's no incentive at that point to satisfy the need to advocate for somebody's rights or to defend someone. And I think that the last presentation, it was a really good story of, you don't know what you don't know. And you were talking about how we grow up, we don't realize that, for example, the captioning, or that people understood each other, that people have access, and that you're supposed to be able to understand what a film or a TV show is about. And then later on in your life, you realize, and oftentimes somebody who has rights, and when they are violated, they don't even realize that they have those rights in the first place. So they are not able to really fight for themselves at all. And then again, the cycle is just perpetuated. So yeah, thank you for your comment. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about deaf youth in different environments growing up. So for some, and they're in a mainstream school compared to those who grow up in a deaf school. So, and there are different challenges that they face in a mainstream program. Oftentimes, isolation is one of the factors. Sometimes it might be language isolation from their peers, not knowing how to communicate with those, feeling left out, being alone, trying to catch everything, like you had mentioned visually, and that fatigue that happens by the end of the day, trying to catch things in communication. Similarly, staff, teachers, others, they don't understand how to connect with students who are deaf or hard of hearing. So that's more isolation, more difficulties. So it's not a natural interactive process. They have, let me open my notes and just double check on my laptop as well. Hard to see the screen over there. But again, experience that language isolation and the impact that has on themselves. Their self-esteem, their ability to socialize and feel connected like they belong. They may go home to an environment where, again, there's no language access. And they don't have it at school either. So that can be extremely difficult and very distressing for students. I think it's similar to, like you said, lots of discipline happens. If a student has a behavioral challenge, maybe that behavioral challenge really is happening because They don't understand. They're not able to connect. They're acting out, so to speak. But the child is really seeking justification, comfort, belonging, and then they get punished. And then that just creates a worse behavioral situation, and it just gets escalated from there. The isolation continues. And so I think it's really important to understand if a teacher doesn't get it, or the teacher, maybe there's a cultural difference with a child, or let's say the kid comes from a deaf family as well. So, you know, there might be some behavioral issues that pop up in class, but then the deaf parents come to school, try to interact with the teacher and have a conversation, but then the teacher still doesn't really understand how they can communicate with the parents, with the child. And then I know you've seen this happen. Yes, it happens. Some people are nodding. Yes, you've been in these situations yourselves. Just that disconnect, and then things get worse and worse and worse throughout time. So it's similar for lots of deaf kids. If they have a deaf role model, or if they don't have anything like that in place, it's very stressful to try to fit in with their peers. They want to look and act like they belong, like they're like the rest of them. They don't want attention, so they say, I'm good, I'm following you, I understand, yeah, keep it going, I'm good. Maybe their teachers even will just move them through and pass them along, right? Just let them keep going through the system and think it's not my problem, we're just gonna let this kid slide. So there's so many things, challenges that students face, needing those life skills. Some of them, you know, they just, that need for meaningful relationships, and, you know, they need to access information visually for all that content. There might be extracurricular activities they're doing, clubs, sports, etc. And if they're feeling withdrawn and isolated, it really impacts their educational experience. Yep, I think we can go to the next slide. So for deaf school students, we see more and more budget cuts are happening across the board. Programs are shutting down. Deaf schools have less people. Their enrollment is down. Shortage of staff. They're often overworked. So we see lots of issues. People don't stay long term. They might be there for a year, so there's a high rate of turnover. We're seeing lots of numbers where just, again, lots of new people coming in, replacement. So the teacher might be there for a year and then, or a month, and then they're gone. So there's not lots of stability for those students. Similarly, if there's a student who is in a place that maybe they don't really have the space sometimes. Like if they're at a deaf school or they grew up with the same people that they've always known, there can be lots of positives to that. They might have real strong connections, but we also see that it can be a challenge, especially if you are in danger or if you have a traumatic experience with somebody. You may have been bullied, and then it might be a staff member who, because of their power, have taken advantage of a deaf child, and there's no real way to avoid that individual because they're there. So you have to go to school, right? I mean, there might be 35 kids in the graduating class, and you live on campus in the dorms all week, and you know, you may be there from K through 12, and you're basically in the same system. So it can be very difficult in a small community like that, where maybe these people are afraid to speak up because, you know, they might, if they really want to go to a hearing, you know, a public school, and then, you know, if I say something, they're going to accuse me of stirring the pot because it's such a small community. So, you know, they're pretty isolated. They might be around that person they're not even comfortable with, but they're not feeling safe or able to speak up. So have you heard about some of those pros and cons as far as residential school for the deaf, mainstream environment? Any other comments or questions that you'd like to share? So my experience growing up, I was mainstreamed in a deaf hard of hearing program. And I also saw the deaf school because the school there, so in the past, they hired lots of hearing people as staff. But as students, you know, we would try to interact with those teachers, and you know, some of them were fluent in ASL, but others weren't. And so we didn't always have the opportunity to express ourselves or have a space like that. In the mainstream environment, there was some communication, but I think, help me out, Lee. So yeah, just interacting within the deaf school wasn't always the best opportunity. Now I think more and more deaf people work there. There's more deaf staff who are fluent, so maybe things have improved. Is that a greater impact? Are things better now? Less hearing people are running those deaf schools? I don't know. Why is the funding being cut? Do we have transparency in that communication? So just lots of thoughts come to mind when it comes to those different settings.
So some positive and negatives of growing up in a deaf school is you have lots of support, but also everyone knows your business. So like I have my own personal hearing kids that when they finish elementary school, they go to a brand new middle school. No one really knows them, like the staff doesn't know if they've had behavior problems, things like that. They don't know their parents that well, or that's one of kind of the cons that happens with deaf schools, that sometimes something that someone did in middle school, we still remember when they're seniors and they're kind of identified with that. Also just the fact that they can't really get away from their peers. They have the stressors during the day with them and they go to the dorms with the same peers. So sometimes that's a real issue also.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, I've been to both deaf schools and I was also mainstream growing up. And one of the negatives about being mainstream is that that's it. Yep, when you're done with class, that's it. That's all you've got, those friends in class, right? These particular people in this row, these same kids are the same. That's it. At the deaf school, now, I mean, just beautiful. I mean, both settings are great, right? Great. Pros and cons of both places. But at the deaf school is like, oh my gosh, everybody in the cafeteria signs, all the staff sign, security signs, everybody on campus signs. Oh my God, all these people are signing. I joined the deaf school when I was 13. It was the middle of the year. I had an option of going, well, when they found out that I was accepted at the deaf school, that was on a Friday. And I could choose to either show up on Sunday or wait until the following month. I was there that Sunday. I'm telling you what, I was there. And one of the things that as time went on and I grew up and I look at now, it's like, thinking about a teenager finding their identity when they're not with their family, finding that identity. Who am I? I'm not my parents. I'm not them, right? They taught me well. I had a good foundation in family support, but they taught me well. But I could form my own identity. I had my own peers, my own friends, my deaf identity. That was a beautiful part about the deaf school that I gained. Yeah, good point.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. Those are very good points. I mean, I may repeat myself later because this does come up in another slide, but I think about, we think about deaf kids who can manage those environments. Like they can regulate themselves in a public school, or they can regulate themselves at the school for the deaf. Like, I think that's what comes to mind when we think of schools for the deaf and public schools. But then we have a group of people who can't really self-regulate so well, maybe have problems with behavior and behavior management. Like, I think of many cases where a deaf student has gotten in trouble with the law, maybe has committed a crime, and maybe they committed that crime against a peer. And where do they go? How do they handle that student? Many times I've seen problems escalate because there is no place for them to go, and so maybe they are consequenced by a suspension or something like that, and then a few days later they are back on that same campus, ready to repeat the same behaviors that they got in trouble for just a week ago. And it can be a huge risk, because we don't have programs to work with kids with sort of specialized behaviors. All right, we have another question.
It's not perfect. Okay, I was just wondering, that's interesting what you just said. So I was wondering if you were talking about like a hearing student, what would you mean? Like, as in they get expelled from this school and then they go to the school that's like 5 miles away, you mean like that? So that they're like taken out of the environment? And so they don't have, like the deaf kids don't have another option other than the one they're in? Is that what you're saying?
That's kind of what I'm saying, yeah. I mean, when you have, there's a whole continuum of psychological, psychiatric services. You know, when you think about like what meets the needs of most kids, and then you start to go up like a pyramid at different levels. You know, okay, where does this child belong? And we can think of placements all over Texas, right, where we can serve those kids. But how many of those placements serve deaf children? You know, so we don't have those. And so, and then there are also safety principles. So like if a person is, and I hate to use negative terminology, but if a person is a perpetrator, you know, if a person physically or sexually hurts another person, they're guilty of that, it's not appropriate for them to be in the same environment with the person who was their victim. That, you know, even if they have some sort of expression of sorrow, you know, and regret for that, it's that what we should be looking for are the needs of the victim first. And a lot of times the victim will not want to be in the same place as that perpetrator, and they have the right to feel safe at school. And so where is that perpetrator going to go? You know, so do we have the appropriate services to serve deaf kids in that capacity? And I think that's another one of those where these agencies will say, we don't have the resources, and we would have to hire an interpreter, it's too complicated, and oftentimes we're quick to sort of say, we'll absorb them back into the same ecosystem where they are continuing, you know, to make, you know, where it's a continuous threat.
Thank you, that helps.
Yeah.
And I think it's similarly, I'm thinking of the example of, let's say, a hearing student who, you know, they often have plenty of options. So for deaf students, they just don't have them. Like there was a colleague who worked in the military, or excuse me, in Canada, and there was a staff member, a deaf student in that school, and they were developing a conversation with each other, and the deaf person just didn't like that person. And it wasn't a dangerous, bad situation, but they just they didn't get along. These two people just didn't get along. It's important to recognize that sometimes, you know, with hearing students, they have lots of other options, different teachers, different staff, people that they can bond with and get along with, but sometimes deaf people just don't have a choice. It's very limited. It's not just limited to today, but also they're just limited to, you know, hopes they have for themselves, recognizing what's possible, what potential they have for the future. What is possible for life? Can they develop their own ideas? Can they develop their own future long term? So yeah, sometimes it's just options. So I appreciate your comment. Thank you. So we've talked a lot about different challenges. We talked about ACEs, stressors, all of that things. I think it's also important in this context that we talk about life as a whole, that life itself has challenges. So we all can experience different things, joy, love, connection. We all overcome different situations like that sometimes in life, just related to different things, interactions. So we've done some studies on how youth develop resiliency and how they are able to navigate different situations in life and maintain that sense of self and maintain that sense of being able to thrive and develop. You know, we have lots of ways that people can kind of get stuck, but we also have things in each of us, ways that we can invest in and develop our own self, our interactions. This is the same for youth. So the first thing, there must be at least one stable relationship with an adult. It can be a game changer for people. This is really important for life. Like, you know, I remember, you know, I would never have been able to go through middle school without this particular teacher or a mentor that I had or a neighbor, for example. So one individual makes a huge difference in the life of somebody. I felt like I was seen. I felt like I had some guidance. I was being protected. I had support. Somebody who was listening to me, somebody who cared about me, who thought that I had potential, etc. So that's really crucial that youth develop that. And in general, that anybody has a sense of that connection with somebody, that they have some person in their life that's for them. Also participating in a faith-based practice or environment, or in a cultural group of some sort. It could having a space on campus, for example, for those who identify as LGBTQ. It could be people that belong to some other sort of a sense of commonality, maybe a club, people who can have role models, mentors, just again, a way to connect. I think it's really important that people know others who have similar, vibes that they can have together, maybe have access to classes or a lecture of some sort. That's all good and well, but just having something else that they can do for relaxation, and everybody needs to figure this out for themselves, right? Or a chance where they can just kind of get along and have some banter and really connect to other people. Everybody has to figure this out for themselves, how that sense of belonging feels and how they navigate and find that cultural group, or, everybody needs that, I think. So yeah, he was saying before that some people have a high sense of self-regulation, they can navigate tough situations, they're able to, kind of foster those skills and really able to invest in that way. Some people say, yep, this is something that I can do well. You've seen a lot of times in sports or different clubs, competitions, well, they say, oh, hey, you have a huge challenge, and the challenge is exciting, and you're going to learn some strategies and learn how to figure out how to go through this tough experience, and it takes a lot of creativity. You can find purpose in these difficult, tough challenges, and some people really connect with that. And so I think it's real important that, we look at it in a positive frame, and you can say, hey, I have these good qualities. I am good at this or that. And also just have that kind of belief in yourself that you're able to grow, that you're able to change, that you have an exciting future ahead of you. I think that's just crucial for maintaining that positive mental health. Similarly, in school experiences, like in that environment, in a school situation, you spend a lot of your youth and a lot of time in school. You wake up, you get ready for school, you go to school, you're there all day, right? And if you have after-school activities, then you're still there. So we spend a lot of our time developing there in school. So we want to make sure that that space feels not just tolerable, but is good, is beautiful, is happy and exciting, and that there's that balance. There's a diversity of option, a variety of options, experiences with peers, opportunities. I think it's really, really important because, again, you spend so much time there. Similarly, to have a value system and just how that affects behavior. So even if it's just, teaching someone how to set boundaries, teaching somebody about consent, planning and just figuring out how somebody's going to behave in particular challenging situations, or let's say you're in a relationship. What type of friends do you want to have? What type of a partner do you want to become? And just trying to figure out all of those different types of values. I think we really, when we experience these things, we do that in a direct way, but sometimes it's second and third hand through having books that we're reading, or having TV shows, or having examples in the community that we have role models and access to those ways of, again, looking up to others. I'm seeing some people say, hey, you've got some, role models and different things to talk about. So my wish lesson for all of you would be, whether it's in school or like for lesson planning, to incorporate mindful behaviors, mindful practices within the classroom. Mindfulness practices, exercise, that type of thing. So before class starts, do some breathing techniques, do some ways to get your thoughts prepared. Students can learn that lesson early on, and then you can teach the lesson, and by the end of class time, again, take a minute to do some breathing, some meditative practice, something. Help them review what you've just gone over in class. I think it really is a great benefit. I wish that everybody in the whole country would do that, and we could apply those deaf or hearing schools. It doesn't matter, but I really would hope for that. There's not a lot of research when it comes to ASL mindfulness practices, but I think this goes along with what you were talking about. And this is something that I have experienced, and I just really, really connect with that. I would like to mention it. Could I add something to his comment too? One thing about me is that I'm a mother of a child who's deaf-blind, a boy who's 13. And so we take a look at how we as deaf, or anybody with just assessing the visual environment to make sure that people are communicating, how do people interact. And my son has no vision access whatsoever, so he has to navigate everything through touch. So we, when mom and dad are talking, we allow him to touch both of us, or anybody that he is in the environment. We like to include that as much as possible. So I just want to throw that out there to include those who are deaf-blind, and the fact the touch perspective is something to keep in mind. There's lots of opportunities for those people as well. Yeah, I really appreciate that. It's really beautiful for me. I oftentimes focus on such a deaf-centered approach that I look at, and we want to celebrate, not just accommodate those people, and just really recognize the individual as a whole. And I said, like Keva had said this morning, when we make something more accessible for the individual, it's really making the environment better for everybody. Everybody benefits from that. When we embed it into the environment, then it really helps everyone. And I think to normalize that too, and not be like, oh, I've got to do this and this for so-and-so, but let's just design it that way, because keeping everybody in mind, it really benefits everybody. So I really appreciate him saying that, them saying that, you as well. And I think that it can be very simple sometimes. Just, when we look at curriculum for teachers, they have a curriculum that they have to follow. However, we need to figure out how to make it more adaptable. Which videos am I using? Are they accessible? Is my content, can I use this to teach a similar concept in a different way? Or what would students really benefit from? And just bringing all of that to the table, figuring out how you can set up the classroom environment for all students, so that everybody feels excited and safe, and it's a positive space. Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so we, for maybe 5 minutes, look at the person at your table, or if you are a table of 2 or so, just make a small group together and just have a conversation for a couple minutes about your role and how we can maybe foster a more healthy environment for deaf youth. Let's see, I'd rather do we have questions on that slide that we can, maybe the resiliency slide, or can you go back one? I think we're going to do questions about this one. Do you prefer this slide, or which would you like to discuss? This one's better. Okay, so let's keep with this slide. So yeah, let me give you all about 5 minutes just to have a conversation about what you see here, and then we'll regroup. Okay, everybody. All right. Up here, we're ready to reconvene here. You can get each other's attention. Yep, I know, time goes quickly. 5 minutes, yep. It's been more than that, so. I know. All right, so comments. Let me know what some of your discussions were about. Hey, can you get their attention over here? We are back. Over here in this corner. Hey, oh, my bad. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so thoughts, anything that you wanted to share out? Anybody? I know lots of discussions were happening. I could see some things going on. Anybody want to share? Yeah.
Una adversidad.
No, pero para que la escuchen también.
Ok. Una adversidad para él que tuvo cuando estaba joven, o sea, 18 años, era de que no podíamos inyectarlo o una aguja.
So she's talking about when something that really happened to him when he was 18 years old. They couldn't find a vein to put some medicine.
Or put the IV. Él,
Que me lo ponga más cerca.
¿Yo?
¿Ya? ¿Usted?
Ah, bueno. Entonces, teníamos que usar 3 o 4 personas para poder inyectarlo o sacarle sangre.
So they had to have 3 or 4 people to hold him down to put the IV on.
Y en ese entonces ya se le había quitado la medicina para controlarlo o algo.
So he didn't have the medication to control his behavior.
Entonces, lo que hice yo y otra persona, fuimos como 3 semanas antes para que él conociera lo que...
So I took him like 3 weeks before so he could get familiar with the people that were there or the environment that was there, like putting the thing on the arm, to, squeeze the arm,
conocer a la enfermera
to
que
learn,
iba,
to know the nurse.
3 semanas. Y ese día,
3 weeks before
gracias a Dios, se dejó por primera vez.
and that was the first time that he ever allowed the people to put the IV on, because he learned that who the people were and what the environment was all about.
Aprendí yo, ¿verdad? Y él, a que ahora que le van a hacer un procedimiento, tengamos que llevarlo antes.
So I learned that, before they do anything to him, that I have to show him
Y para nosotros, o para él, es un
ahead of
logro,
time. So
es
that
un
was a good,
logro que fue un factor que la comunidad,
so the community helped me,
para que me ayudara, porque
they helped me.
uno como padre piensa que a lo mejor todo el mundo, que yo lo puedo hacer sola, pero él
So they
necesita de
think
la
that
comunidad.
since I'm a parent, I could do it myself, but I need the whole community.
Y ahora lo puedo llevar a un restaurante y está bien,
So now even I could take him to a restaurant, he feels comfortable.
porque antes no podía estarse en paz.
And before he wouldn't do that.
Ya, se nos teníamos que salir.
And we had to leave the restaurant. I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. Wow. Yeah, I think that's a good example of knowing his particular needs and wants and not making those assumptions or realizing, oh, if we go ahead and do something without explaining it to him first, then he's not going to feel comfortable or safe. So again, being able to explain that, figure out things, and then, everything will be so much smoother. Like Michelle, with the example with her, very similar concept of Michelle not becoming necessarily really violent. That wasn't something that should have escalated that much, but just having had a simple explanation of perhaps of what was going on, probably would have been able to avoid a lot of harm and hurt in her life. Yes, over here.
Just like this? Yep. Okay. So I'm curious about your perspective or any experience that you know of with deaf and hard of hearing students getting kicked out of state schools for the deaf, where they have no choice but to go to public school. If you have experience with that, or you know someone with a personal story like that.
Well, I've heard of that. I don't know that I have a good resolution for that, but I think that, to me, I would be looking to go back to that school and to talk with the leadership about the importance of, comprehensive programming and trying to, push to develop more comprehensive programming, so that if a student does struggle and they need more specialized programming, that they can get it. You can also get that same advocacy and point it not only at the school for the deaf, but also at your local public school, because typically the local public school sends funding to the school for the deaf. And if there's some advocacy at your local level too, perhaps you can have that funding increased, and that the school for the deaf can get the supports they need. And it's definitely a synergy and interchange where the two are working together. I don't really have a very clear strategy for that, but advocacy is really important, and I'm sure that your scenario was not the only one. I'm sure that there's lots like that as well, just like Michelle and her scenario, lots of situations like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would like to add, similar to what your comment was, as far as getting expelled from school, whether it's a deaf school or getting kicked out and sent away, I don't really advocate for that. I would rather them stay because then you're taking away their education as well. We need to think about not depriving them of an education and wanting them, struggling is one thing, but, needing to find solutions within that environment. It's not easy. Finding a permanent solution, I totally get it because I've experienced that with students who I've had issues with, and some say they need to be expelled, but it's like they need to stay in school and get educated. We need to find supports and have those in place, programming of some sort. Again, it comes down to money, which sometimes isn't there, but sometimes we feel stuck. But yeah, I totally empathize with that, and we need to work on that, figure out how to make solutions and have better approaches down the road. So lots to think about.
I mean, when I work with schools, we talk about, what's your philosophy? Like a lot of kids, a lot of people who are school leaders will ask me, where do I draw the line when it comes to psychological treatment at this school? And I usually go back and say, well, what's your mission for your school? Like, what kind of work are you trying to do well? And if it fits within your mission, like if social emotional learning or something like that fits within your mission, then that is what you should be doing. And if it doesn't really fit within your mission, if you're talking about a more psychiatric intervention, then you should be looking outside your school, or you should be amending your mission. So the kind of work that you do at your school depends a lot on what the objectives of the school, the mission for the school.
Okay, me too, I'll voice. But something that kind of really struck me, and this is not really much of a thing that can be fixed through school education, but in the slide before, in the video we watched about, I already forgot their name, but their name sign was like this, but Michelle, yes, okay. So in the video about Michelle was that all the reactions to whenever they were having a mental health crisis were pretty violent from the police initially, and I just think that's just an issue in itself, and maybe it's just something that can be improved through advocating for better legislative changes and the way police react to this, and the fact I think it's kind of weird that police are the ones to respond to that in the first place, but that just initial response being really aggressive is just not improving anything for someone who's, clearly about to, take their life. So, yeah.
What's your name?
Sharon. It's spelled like Sharon, but it's Sharon.
Sharon, you bring up a really good point. We were going to talk about this later, but I'll make a quick comment now. I think that the federal government has identified that police response to every crisis is not appropriate. And so, in spite of the fact that I teach at Gallaudet and I live in New York, I have worked for many years in Connecticut. And Connecticut has really been a national leader in trying to divert people from the justice system when they have a mental health crisis. And so what they have been, and now it's actually a federal law that all states have to develop a 988 crisis system. And so now when there's a mental health crisis, instead of calling 911 for the police, they should be calling 988, and 988 should have resources to go. In Connecticut, they have mobile crisis, and most states should have a mobile crisis system where they go right to the site and they try to de-escalate with professionals who are unarmed, don't have guns, don't have badges. They're just there to try to provide support in a mental health crisis. The problem is that sometimes weapons, we're a very weapon-centric society, and sometimes weapons are involved, and when that's the case, there's always going to have to be police involvement. They'll have to go to make sure that the site is safe, and typically they have strategies. They should be working together to where a police officer clears the site, backs away, and lets the mental health professional come in to try to work with de-escalation. But I'm getting too granular now, but thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you for that.
Where I come from is I live in the Rio Grande Valley, and during COVID, we have 7 people or 7 persons who were disabled that died because of shooting from a sheriff or from a police. And it was very sad because I thought in my son, and we make, how can I say, letters to the sheriff to tell us or to receive us at the sheriff's police office or with the police, and we start trying to do it right now. Let me pass to her.
No, you're doing good. You're doing good.
No, dile que todavía estamos haciendo cartas y tratando.
So we're still trying to send letters and communicate with them
Another sheriff que no,
and voting for a different sheriff
para que no haga eso lo que hizo,
so it
pasó,
won't happen again,
porque esas personas estaban mentalmente
because
mal,
those people had a mental
dos de ellos
condition.
estaban sordos,
2 of them were deaf,
y pues reaccionaron así
and they
como
reacted
están
that way,
diciendo.
like you were saying, the same thing.
No vamos a parar hasta o que tengan entrenamiento.
And that's not going to change until they have
O
the
como dicen,
training,
hasta que se cambie de sheriff.
or they have to change
Y
the
también
sheriff.
Estamos tratando de hablar con los jefes de policía
We
ahí
want to talk to the police chiefs
para que cambien, para que se les dé el entrenamiento debido
so they can get the training that they need for people that have a disability, either deaf or autism.
Gracias a Dios que mi hijo cuando tuvo sus crisis
Thank God, when my son had his crisis,
me tocaron 2 policías que en Navidad me estuvieron
I had
ayudando.
2 police officers that they
También
helped
hay
me.
que reconocer que hay algunos que
And then
sí
you have to
ayudan.
recognize that there are some police officers that are good.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to quickly just respond to her. I don't know. I mean, even though I'm from Texas originally, I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know exactly how they establish policy for police training. But I know in every state establishes it in a different way. In some states, and I'm sorry to keep referring back to Connecticut, but it's what I know. Like Connecticut has police advisory boards, so they have members of the public, including leaders in police, and they listen. They go to meetings once a month. They listen to like what have the police been doing, how many arrests, and then they give feedback on working with the public. So if there are advisory boards in the Rio Grande Valley, if they're all over Texas, that's a great way to start opening communication with law enforcement. If there's not something like that, then what needs to happen is, and I know this is happening in some states where there's legislation. That's the best way to act, really, is legislation. And again, I'm sorry for the reference to Connecticut, but that's what I know. And in Connecticut, they just passed some new legislation called the Police Accountability Act. And so they did. I was involved in some of the research with law enforcement, as well as some other parties. And they have now a requirement to work with deaf people. So the Connecticut Association of the Deaf is now going to be starting next year, they're going to be part of the cadet training. So all of the new cadets are going to have a seminar with a deaf professional who's going to talk to them about the importance of interaction and how to manage escalated situations, things like that with deaf people. So I think that there will be some change in that community, and we need to see that nationwide. It's important to see that nationwide. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sorry, but it's, okay, we'll take a break after this last question. Okay, we're supposed to take a break right now. Let's go ahead and get this question in.
Real quick, just to let you all, in Texas, we do have training for police officers for those new cadets, and it is how to interact with deaf and hard of hearing people. So we have that set up. It's in the law. It is a requirement. That's actually where I work at Deaf Hard of Hearing Services. So we do send people out to the public to do that. We do provide and develop what's called People with Disabilities Guidelines for Interaction. And that is set up. We have it in place. But again, it's a big state, right? And are people following the guidelines? Are the supervisors enforcing it? Are they making sure that people comply? We just don't know. Some of those communities have set up a PIP, positive interactive program, and these are trainings for police officers so that they know how to de-escalate situations that might get out of hand, how to appropriately interact and have a more positive way and have more positive attitudes. So I just want to let you know that it is out there. Is that the entire state of Texas? Yes, it is. And it's in law? It is in law, yes. Yes, indeed. Thank you.
That's great.
All right, let's go ahead and give you all a 15-minute break. So come back at, let's say, 2:47. Take a break and enjoy yourselves. Feel free to come up if you've got any questions as well.
Okay, our next slide is a case study, okay? Now, Grace and I are going to share a few case studies, and they are, in general, authentic. They're cases, at least the cases that I've had. I've seen lots and lots of people involved with the legal system, but I've changed a lot of the content to make sure that that the person can't really be identified. But I just want you to know that some of them are a little bit disturbing. Okay, so here's one of those that that is a little bit disturbing. So just a little bit of a warning. Okay. Oops, how did that happen? There it is. Okay, so this case is about, we'll call him Joe. And Joe is an, oh, I'm sorry. I'll give you a second to read it. Okay, so I met Joe for the first time in prison. His family hired an attorney to try to defend him, and his attorney hired me to help them do an evaluation. So I went and met Joe, and he was only 18. At this point, he was almost 19 years old when I met him, but this crime occurred when he was 18. So what happened to Joe was just a little bit of his history. He was born in Mexico and immigrated to the U.S. His parents came from Mexico to live in Arizona primarily because Joe was deaf. They had a happy life in Mexico. They were doing fine, and they realized that he was not going to get a decent education, so they relocated. They left, and they began to work, and they must have done fairly well because they owned property in Arizona. They had a business, and Joe had some siblings. So Joe, when he was 5 years old, began to learn sign language. He went to a mainstream program, a public school program. They were very, connected to their culture. And so when Joe graduated high school at about age 18, the expectation for most deaf kids is to do some sort of transition programming or to go to college. But Joe's parents said, no, he's going to stay right here on our property. He's going to live with us, and we're going to take care of Joe. And I assumed that at some point in the future, he would have eventually gone off into a transition program, but that he didn't have that opportunity because very quickly Joe became bored. He had really nothing to do, and so he was on the computer looking for a relationship. He was looking to date, and Joe was gay, so he was looking for boys. He was looking for other men, and he found somebody. The person he found, though, was 14, and when he met up with that person, the authorities had already been watching him. They already had gotten tipped off, because when you go into those discussion boards, chat rooms, you're on Google or you're on other platforms. Whenever there's any kind of concerning behavior, they often will forward that content onto law enforcement. So even if it's the kind of content that disappears, I've been to court many times, and I have seen those because they disappear off of your devices, but they are saved in the cloud, and the police have access to them once they subpoena them from the owner of the platform. So they knew that Joe was going to meet up with this boy, and they arrested him, pretty quickly. But he did meet up with the boy, and they arrested him. So now, just so that you guys know a little bit more, that Joe has an IQ of 78. Now, we happen to have some psychologists in the room, so I'm wondering if what does 78 mean to you guys? Like, what is this? What is? Okay, so we had a person said that's low average. Yeah, like that's, I mean, I would sort of say that that's in the borderline range. That could all, I mean, it could, but what does that mean functionally, like what a person can do? Does he understand his life and things around him? Probably, he's not going to be a college-bound person, but he's also not intellectually disabled. So things need to be made pretty simple to him so that he can understand the world around him. You know, but he can function. Like he could certainly at 78, a person could have a job, and with maybe some support or some guidance, they could live either semi-independently or independently. So Joe's easily confused, right? So what happened here in this situation, even though people may have told him that it's against the law or you shouldn't try to have a relationship with someone who's younger, I don't think Joe understood what was going on. So before I go any further, I'm just curious. I want you guys to think about it for a minute. What could we have done to prevent this situation? What could the systems in place that we have in Texas have done to make sure that Joe did not have this negative interaction with our legal system? Yes, sir.
Okay, my first thought that comes to mind is, as far as moving from Mexico to Arizona, how long before he became a U.S. citizen was he, exposed to the legal system? I mean, that was my first kind of question.
Yeah, he began to go to school right away when he was 5 years old. That's where he learned sign language. He was a very fluent user of sign language. And when somebody hires me to do that work, I usually try to get all the records. So I had all of his behavioral history from the school, his academics, his grades, prior IEPs, things like that. So I could see that he had a history of being a cooperative young man. Never one office referral, a lot of comments from teachers saying what a good student, very friendly, very pro-social. So lots of times when I meet people who are in his situation, there's a history there, a concerning history, but not with Joe. What are some other things we can think of? We've got several hands up. I don't really know where to go, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was interested in, I may have missed this at the very beginning, but how old was he when he learned sign language or any language? I might have missed that. How old was he then?
He was about 5 when they immigrated, so he started learning sign right away.
5 years old. So, yeah, this makes me think of, clearly some language deprivation has happened. So his not ability to understand concepts, consent, age differences. So yeah, I think that lots of this is access from birth to 5, which is so crucial for ASL, LSM. Yeah, if he had had access, I think it could have prevented this situation from happening.
That's a really good point now, and I'm not going to, and this is just a reality, it's not a criticism, but his parents, all being from Mexico, spoke Spanish, and they didn't learn English or ASL. He got all of his sign language exposure at school. Now, they did have some home signs. He could communicate. They were loving parents, but that was sort of the reality that he lived in. He didn't have strong communication with his parents.
We have a couple of comments from Zoom. One is parents and or someone Joe trusted could have had discussion with him about age-appropriate relationships. And another comment is, I would have spent a lot of time during transition meetings with him explaining laws and rules about adulthood in terms of guns, drugs, relationships, like I did with my 22-year-old deaf son.
Yeah, very good points. Very good points. I think in hindsight it's 2020. Like we can look back and say this is what should have happened with Joe, but putting those practices in place now going forward is so critical, right? Like having him understand the legal system. Like when we think, like Grace was talking about pros and cons of public school and versus schools for the deaf. When a kid goes to public school, and maybe when they go to school for the deaf, they take like a civics class, like understand the government, and how much emphasis is on ADA? This is the primary law that will protect deaf kids to help them to learn advocacy, help them to be more self-sufficient, independent, and how much emphasis is put on that? Very, very little, I imagine.
Right.
Maybe we'll take one more question, but
And I
I'm
wanted to
worried
add
about
as well.
time.
Yeah, if I could just
go ahead.
interject for a second here. I think also it's really important to recognize that, Joe was not straight, and I don't know what type of LGBTQ models he had for that queer community, role models, et cetera, in his life. And I don't, know if his family was supportive of him, if they were even aware of his sexuality, or what types of communication at all that he may have had surrounding that. That would have allowed for him to kind of foster and navigate or celebrate who he is, who he felt. Maybe he had to hide that from others, hide his sexuality as far as dating and interests and who he was attracted to. So what did that look like for Joe? And, had he had a safe place for that to be, perhaps that he may have had an open relationship and been able to date and been open about some of these feelings, most likely did not have those. So it looks like he was pretty isolated and, after graduation didn't have a lot of interaction or support as well with the queer community. And so we don't know what that looked like in the area of where he lived, but just something to think about, any sort of role models or examples. I mean, not just healthy relationships of what those look like in general, but specific to being a gay individual and having a relationship in that respect. So I think it's really important that, we have representation of different styles and different relationships of what those look like. The queer relationships that don't always look like are very clear, perhaps, or as traditional. So, maybe they're feeling like, oh, I'm not in, quote, a normal relationship, but sometimes individuals don't realize because they haven't had exposure to different types of possibilities.
All right, should we move on?
I'm good. Yeah, let's do it. So really, this is just I want to explain a little bit about, but let me give you a second to look at this. So the lighter brown is where like an end point, and then the darker would be a continuation of the system. So again, youth justice system at a glance. And the next slide is kind of similar, but it's based on this diagram. So if you take a look at this, I just want to give people kind of an indication of, when you enter the system and how that process goes along and where you can end up. There's a point at which you can exit the system, or are you continuing into that and getting deeper and deeper in? So I think it's, again, crucial that we expand on this a little bit more of how deaf people need those resources and support at each phase in this process. So take a look at that for a minute, and then we will have a slide share as well, that if you want to take a more in-depth look at this after our presentation too, we can send that to you. Yeah, I'm blocked by the backdrop. I want to make sure the whole slide was visible. Those of you on the right side of the room might have a hard time seeing it like I do. So this is just an overview. Yeah, next slide.
Okay, before I go to the next slide, I want to point out that look how complex the system is, right? There's so many different twists and turns, and that's really what Grace was trying to emphasize as well. But I think about some of these twists and turns are diversionary programs, like, oh, well, maybe this is a first-time offense, so let's maybe not put this person into like a punitive situation. Let's put them into a therapeutic situation. Sounds wonderful, right? But is that accessible for deaf youth?
Right.
All I know is when I lived in Texas, I've seen some of these facilities, and they may have a deaf person there, but there's no access.
That's true.
Okay, I think this one, are we going to play it from here, or were you going to switch it over?
We can try.
Well, I think you've got it up since you've I think you've got it up on the, there you go. Okay, go ahead. Oh, I can do it?
Yeah, Grace, yeah, just make it smaller. It doesn't have to be in presentation mode like we did earlier. You can just make it all smaller.
Turn over to you, the knife is right there on the ground up there.
Grace was talking to you.
You know where my stuff is at, right there on the left side. Let's get it secured.
Okay, hold on.
So what you're about to see is more of being Michelle. Sure.
Go ahead and restart this. Yeah, and look for the ways that they're contacting different parts of the system here.
Got it? Got it? Yes, sir. All right, so you see this on you. Yeah. Turn over to you, the knife is right there on the ground up there. So get something to secure. You know where my stuff is at, right there on the left side. Let's get it secured. She can have 666. Face the car for me, ma'am. Face the car. Face the car, ma'am. In your purse, and we can check to make sure there's no additional weapons, okay?
Well, deputies saw he was sitting in front of the Dollar General when an unarmed Lowell correction officer who was in uniform off duty came out of the Dollar General and advised that former inmate Michelle Romaine Ricks had just pulled a knife on him inside the store and was chasing him around. She violated her probation. Her previous arrest was for, get this, assaulting a law enforcement officer.
Making it a habit.
You want to take your jacket off because you're hot?
Are you hot?
She won't talk, she's dead.
Oh, she is.
We have enough PC without her.
Right, yeah.
How do you Miranda as a deaf person? Write it down?
Let her read it.
The crime Michelle Ricks is being accused of is under Florida law called aggravated assault on a law enforcement officer. In layman's terms, it's someone you know or should know is a police officer, and you use a weapon, a deadly weapon, to place them in a reasonable fear that you're going to use that weapon upon them. If I were a prosecutor, I could make a compelling argument why Michelle should go to prison. Michelle pulled a knife on the corrections officer, and that's the crime. It's 15 years for something that happened in 15 seconds. In Michelle's circumstance, definitionally, it's a one-sided investigation. She must be a violent individual. You have all these batteries. people will look at it and say, oh gosh, she might be a sociopath. Michelle's case is a confluence of her prior cases, where as a result of her incarceration in Florida State Prison, she was victimized by the authorities, we believe, and that it was just by happen chance she had run into one of the individuals that had victimized her. And she acted out in a manner that in Michelle's mind was acting in self-defense, but she got arrested for a violent felony. There's this thing called due process that really is the rights of the person in court, that they have a right to a fair trial, that they understand, have the right to be heard, have the right to have their side of the story heard, to be represented by a lawyer. If you can't understand what's being said, nothing about those things are fair, and then that isn't the due process that our law says that every citizen has. Certainly with a number of Michelle's disabilities, we have significant question whether Michelle can ever be competent to proceed. They're setting out to prove that to the court. Michelle's next court date is late June. We still have some work to do because it's going to be the important court date as we stand.
So what do you guys notice there about access? Go ahead. Right, her friend.
I said it looks like her friend was interpreting for her and that she still does not have access to an interpreter.
Absolutely, and the friend, the friend is a person who went to jail, went to jails. She was to advocate for people, and she was able to get Michelle out of prison, which is awesome, but she did not really know how to sign well, so she was misinterpreting a lot there. What else do you notice about access? Go
ahead. In every situation where she was arrested, her hands were behind her back. That's, from my understanding, is illegal, right? Like a violation, but it's supposed to be in the front of your body, right? If you're deaf, so you can communicate gesturally, at least.
It's really not a law that, that people had to be handcuffed in the front. It's more policy.
Policy, okay.
Yeah, and so, that's another area to advocate. If you're going to advocate in your community, that police are supposed to do this based on the threat that's in front of them. It's their practice to always put their hands behind the back because the person is less likely to hurt them. A person who's handcuffed in the front still has the ability to swing their arms,
right.
Could choke an officer. So officers make it their normal practice to handcuff somebody in the back. But if they've committed a crime where they're giving up, like they're willingly saying, "Here, arrest me," then they're less likely to hurt you. And if it's a deaf person, there should be consideration for handcuffing in the front. But I want to point out to you guys that, I don't know if you caught this, but Michelle, when she was in prison, I wish we had time to see the whole film and then have this discussion, but when Michelle was in prison, she was not able to function very well. She couldn't self-regulate. She was over-medicated. There was all kinds of problems. And so when she was misbehaving, some officers did a takedown. And when they did that takedown, they slammed her onto the concrete floor and broke her teeth out. So she knows who did that. And she saw that officer in the Dollar General. And when she saw that officer again, it's that trauma response, right? Like, I need to defend myself. So she picked up a weapon there, and she said, you saw her signing, she said, you hurt me, shame on you, and tried to get out of the Dollar General, that she wasn't trying to attack him, but because she took that weapon out, he called for backup, and an army showed up, and they took her in again.
And also the part, I just wanted to say
That's
one
right.
more thing, the part about the how do you give a deaf person a Miranda rights? And they were still talking to her. Like they were trying to talk to her, and she obviously wasn't understanding. It was
Exactly.
upsetting.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. You're right. Yeah, I don't know if you were counting, but the 5 officers took at least, it looks 7 different police were there on site. And, none of them knew how to interact with the deaf person. And there were several that didn't even realize that she was deaf. But yeah, go ahead. So I wanted to add to the Miranda rights as far as not having the consent. They mentioned printing it out and having her read it. That's not their native language necessarily, so reading something that's in print is not access.
That's a good point, yep. We have other hands up.
We have a question. Sorry about that. We have a question in the chat of how they can access this documentary. Is that available online or somewhere?
Yeah, a quick response to that. It's not commercially available yet because the person who filmed it is hoping to sell it to Amazon or Netflix or something like that. It is available. If you go to beingmichelle.com, you can find a few little clips, and you can find ways to access it, like it'll say sign up for your educational institution, or if you want a public screening or something like that. So right now, they're still trying to, it is available, but it's not easy. You can't just go to Netflix or Amazon to watch it.
Do you have time for a comment from Zoom?
Go ahead.
Okay. I worked with a client who was deaf-blind. The client had suicide ideation with a vague plan. It was decided that the hospital would need to do further evaluation. Instead of being brought to the hospital in an ambulance, the client was instead arrested and handcuffed from behind. This person did not have any intent to harm anyone. We attempted to advocate on her behalf, and the police completely ignored us and said it was protocol. This should not be allowed, especially for someone who struggled with suicide ideation with vague plans. No weapons were on this person.
I don't have a response for that. That's ineptitude, and hopefully we'll see some progress with the new 988 system, that we won't see law enforcement taking people to psychiatric facilities.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we have one more comment from the chat, just to give them a chance to share. The question is there any proposed legislation to address language deprivation and the need for families to communicate with the deaf or deafblind child? This scenario raises the question, and I think this reference back to the previous scenario, at what point is communication deprivation neglect?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that. I don't know that I think legislation, just like we commented earlier about law enforcement, needs to happen state by state, grassroots, people, fighting for, legislation that makes sense so that we don't, continue with the language deprivation for deaf kids. I don't know, Grace, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that it is complicated. And I think, too, that, for example, in my research, I found oftentimes that we do have policies on paper that are written down. We have lots of wonderful ideas, following procedures, but in practice, right? Oftentimes people aren't aware, they ignore it, they don't care, lots of things like that. So figuring out a way that we can make people more accountable for what's already in place so that things are actually happening procedurally, we've seen the judge, we've seen the police officers, we've seen all different types of actors in the legal system who are not doing their jobs adequately. And so the results, they don't often even realize that some, they just maybe went to a one-day training on how to interact with somebody who has a disability, or they, a deaf person, for example. And so I see, that design, that structure needs to change. It's just not adequate. We need to figure out how to change procedures, processes, so it's more available. I also it needs to be community-based as well. I know Oregon has a lot of really cool examples of interventions, diverting police, not calling the police all the time, like you were talking about 988, figuring out ways where people can interact with each other during crisis, or maybe it's a long-term chronic instance, just needing to figure out how we can support each other within the community in ways that don't involve police and the legal system. Because oftentimes, you know, it can be less trauma-inducing, it can be less catastrophic and that type of thing if we work in the communities. I think that maybe answers a little bit of your question, hopefully. Yes. So I wanted to mention from the film, I just noticed that something that was kind of disturbing. Those 5 policemen, when they realized, oh, she's deaf, oh, okay, well, we're just going to stop talking to her now. I was like, wait, I mean, the question comes up that if you recognize someone has a disability and you identify that, do the police then reach out to their own officers who may, you know, whatever section it is, that they can then make a plan to work with the individual who's disabled? I mean, what, do they have anything like a structure that they would resort to at all? I was chatting with somebody who is a lawyer, this was back in the 90s, one of the first deaf attorneys in the US, and she was talking about when she first got her law degree, she was only using TTY to make calls and networking, and she could not call her local police. If she called through a TTY, they would say, nobody's available. There was no response whatsoever. And so oftentimes, like the local firemen, they figure out a way to just, you know, reach out to somebody locally with disability organizations who are there. So sometimes somebody knows somebody in the local area, but, you know, here in Austin, I mean, we've got so many ways that people can collaborate with each other. We've got to be creative and figure out a way, but typically it's not that challenging to provide access, right?
Just a quick comment. I'm not saying that this is going to save, you know, and resolve this situation, but I think this is a powerful film, and we try to show it to state government, local government, and federal government whenever we can. Next month, the filmmaker, actually while I was sitting here, he texted me saying, Gabe, are you available? We have a screening with the FCC, the leadership at the FCC. Those are the people who make policy about access to interpreters on video relay. So I'm super excited about that. I sure hope that, because you walk down any street anywhere in the US, you'll see teenagers and adults on their cell phones using FaceTime, right? Why can't the police, you know, once they've got the situation calmed down, set up an iPad and start to communicate effectively, you know, with the deaf person that they've just arrested or that they're questioning. So immediately they go to more aggressive strategies, and using video relay on demand, we may be able to, you know, help to improve the situation. I was recently speaking in Connecticut at a government, you know, meeting where we showed the entire film to them, and the chief warden for the state told me that they have iPads with immediate access for interpreters. Now, I'm not so sure that that's really happening. It may be brand new, because I had just gone into prison the month before and had found out that the person was using another inmate for interpreting, which is a very dangerous, you know, kind of scenario. If you can only imagine if you're having to trust the person next to you that he's not going to say something, you know, wrong, and that might end up with you, you know, being consequenced, right? So that's a very dangerous situation to have another inmate interpret, you know, for you. But anyway, she's identifying that the technology is emerging in prisons. I would love to see it on police cars. Because of the interest of time, I think we're supposed to finish tonight at 6, right? I got a few giggles, okay? So we still have, we still have at least probably 2 hours worth of content that we're going to try to squeeze into the next 40 minutes or so.
Yeah, I would like to add another comment on this slide. I think that it's just, you know, the correlation, the connections, it's important to recognize that each point of contact that's there, you know, what is the relationship with authority? What are we taught to do when we interact with somebody who has authority, both for deaf individuals and as kids, as youth who are under 18? I think oftentimes people will just freeze and they'll just say, yeah, I'm good, I got it, let's keep going. And oftentimes, you know, maybe they do or don't realize what's going on. If we know that something's wrong, we don't feel like it's our place to say something necessarily, to speak up. So sometimes people, when they are approached with authority, they think, oh, I need to trust them, they know what they're doing. I don't want to create something worse or get in trouble. And so oftentimes I think that's really important to recognize that yes, the ADA has specific rights that are available to individuals, and people have rights. They have the right to an interpreter with an officer who should be right there. You know, they need to accommodate for access in the prison system as well, in the court system too. But how often are we challenged with, you know, does somebody say, hey, I need access here? And, you know, this situation's dangerous for you, right? And then if not, then it's triple, it's double, triple worse. And so the authority issue is definitely a factor. But, you know, sometimes people get into dangerous situations. Hearing inmates oftentimes, you know, are just told to keep your head low or they're going to avoid attention. But a deaf person has to ask for an accommodation. And sometimes needing an accommodation, you know, they need to pass a program to get out of prison. And if they don't have, if they can't pass, then they remain for additional years incarcerated. And so, you know, then they have to interact with regular policemen. They have to interact with, you know, and then they automatically have that attention brought on them as well. And this just is more threatening, more dangerous. And so that person who's incarcerated has a lot more work to do. We don't want to, quote, complain. We don't want to be harassed for needing help or attention. So it can become very dangerous if somebody speaks up, even though if they realize they have a right to these different things or their rights are being violated, sometimes it's not safe to speak up and advocate.
I'm going to give a quick example of what Grace was talking about. Let's say you have a deaf, we'll call them a resident instead of an inmate. We have a deaf resident in a hearing prison, and the deaf person wants to sign up for a class. Let's say there's an addiction class or there's a class, you know, on religion or something like that. So the person puts his name down or her name down on a list, and the other residents identify like, oh, you're signing up? Well, now they're going to cancel the class because the warden's not going to get an interpreter, and so now the class that I wanted to take, it's your fault for, so that puts them in a very dangerous situation, and I think Grace could tell you that happens a lot.
That's true. It does. Thank you for that. Yes.
You know what? I have some content to go with this slide, but because in the interest of time, I want to also make sure there's a little time near the end for you guys to work together. So I'm going to skip it and try to touch on. I don't know why it's not going.
Rochella. Hey, is it stuck? Help us out, Sarah. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, great.
Let me get you back here. Hold on a second.
Nobody believes they would ever confess to a crime they didn't commit.
Cool.
And that's an important starting. Nobody believes they would ever confess to a crime they didn't commit. And that's an important starting point, because to confess to a crime you didn't commit is to put yourself in jeopardy of incarceration. It's not something people do. And so when somebody confesses to a crime, everybody, cops, prosecutors, judges, juries, everybody believes that confession. The psychology underlying the study of false confessions is really two psychologies. Why does it happen? And when it happens, why does everybody believe it? Everybody, I think, fundamentally understands that they have a breaking point. Whatever the story is, if stress levels have built, if the suspect starts to think, and this, again, tends to happen over a period of time, that it's in my better interest to confess than to continue to deny involvement, in that case, what happens is an innocent person succumbs to the pressure and agrees to confess. Now, that's an interesting phenomenon because it is a transient confession. It happens momentarily. And as soon as the pressure of the moment is lifted, as soon as a lawyer comes into the situation, immediately there is a recantation. The suspect recants the confession. I was under pressure. I felt coerced. I didn't do this. That's the hallmark of a compliant false confession. As an act of compliance, they agreed to confess, but privately they knew they never did this, and that was the end of that. That I think people fundamentally understand. Situations like sleep deprivation, threats made or implied, promises made or implied, can alter the mental calculation of a suspect under stress to make them think that it's their best interest to confess at this point. And the interrogation tactic in particular that puts them at risk for that to happen is lying about evidence. In the United States, police are allowed to outright lie. They're allowed to say to a suspect, we had DNA found on the victim and we tested it and it's yours. Or we found hair within the victim's grasp. We tested it, that was your hair. Or we found the victim's blood on your pillow. Or that polygraph that you agreed to take, you failed it. Now, if you take somebody who's vulnerable to manipulation and their grasp on reality is starting to weaken, and you outright lie about the evidence, you can shake in their view of reality. So when you look at confession evidence, you have to ask yourself, what risk factors were present in the person that made him vulnerable? What interrogation tactics were used that would make anybody vulnerable? And there's a good 100+ years of psychology research showing that when you lie to people about reality, when you misrepresent reality, you can produce profound changes in people's visual perceptions, beliefs, autobiographical memories. The problem is 95% of false confessions contain accurate details about the crime that were not in the public domain. When you have a conversation with somebody, when you interrogate somebody, as part of that process of exchange, you're not just eliciting information, you're communicating information. So if a suspect is broken down to the point where the suspect believes it's in his best interest to confess, he probably has received through the process of interrogation enough facts to make that confession credible. I defy any prosecutor or judge or jury or appeals court to get past that statement. It's almost not possible. I've looked at confessions that have proved to be false before I knew they were false, and I believed them. And I'm a critic of confession evidence, but I believed them. And so that is essentially the problem of how you get people to recognize it. That begs now the question, how do you solve this problem? How do you solve a problem both that the false confession happens and that people can't tell a false confession if they see one? An interrogation needs to be recorded from start to finish. Whether you call it an interview or an interrogation, the entire process from start to finish. It will make police better at what they do. It will make suspects more likely to, it may not make guilty suspects more likely to confess, but I think it might make innocent suspects less likely to confess. And then it will make better fact finders of prosecutors, judges, juries, and appeals courts.
There's one more video. Do we have time for that one? Okay. In a little bit. Okay.
So, wow, profound. I don't want to take comments right now because, but I could see the expressions on your faces. Wow, right? Like police are allowed to lie to suspects, and so when they're lying to them, they're planting information into them, and they respond. Now, I'm a big fan of Saul Kassin. He is one of the leading forensic psychologists in the nation. I actually did a presentation right before his at one of the American Psychological Association conference on forensics, so I got to meet him, and he's a phenomenal researcher who focuses a lot of his research on false confessions. Now, one word that I thought he would use there that wasn't there was the term vulnerabilities, right? Like he talks about people with vulnerabilities being more likely to give a false confession. And I ask you this. Are deaf kids more vulnerable than typical? Yep, I see a lot of head shaking. Especially when you start to factor in the other reasons for vulnerability. You know, the poor language, potentially cognitive problems. Now that the law enforcement doesn't recognize that there may be a cognitive problem when they first interact with that person. Michelle is identified as a person who has mild autism and deafness, but the mild autism probably you can't see, even though you guys are deafness experts, right? So there's often other layers of things that are going on that are not apparent, right? And so that's what Kassin's talking about, like people who are vulnerable, like if they came after me, I've got a pretty strong ego, right? And I'd be pushing back, and at some point I would say, look, you guys are giving me false information. I'm calling my attorney and this is done, you know? Like I would try to take control over the situation. But a lot of people who are vulnerable, and even people who are not vulnerable, who have strong egos, will eventually, like you talked about, sleep deprivation, repetitive questionings, false information, eventually they end up caving and they give in and they confess, you know, to something that they did not do. And I'm not trying to say that all deaf people are not guilty, because there's clearly in that scenario before that person was guilty, but there's so many other complexities related to, you know, to these situations. As an expansion on this, Grace has a video that we want to share next.
Yes. Hold on 1 second. Let me explain a little bit of the context before we start the film. So this is a real example of someone who was in an interrogation, and it was in the state of Illinois. It was a kid who I believe was about 15 in this video, and he had, there was evidence, he had evidence of having played in a basketball game during the time of the crime. So they're describing the situation. It was a murder situation that he was being accused of. So you'll notice his clothing, he wears the same outfit all day. He's cold, he doesn't have enough clothing. He mentions being hungry, doesn't have an opportunity to call his parents, call a lawyer at all, and they automatically incarcerate, put him in a room with police, and here's that interaction with the police.
I want to just lay a few things out there. You don't need to say anything. I'm going to explain everything all right now, okay? I know you were involved in an incident a couple Fridays ago to Dollar General, okay? I know a lot about that incident, okay? I've watched the video, okay?
You can see he's shivering there in the seat.
I can't put the words in your mouth unless you tell me, unless you explain the situation. You know what I'm saying? So all I have right now is some video to go off of, and that's it. You know what I'm saying? Wait, can I tell you something? I need you to just hear me out before I let you talk, okay? No, I can tell you, you wouldn't be here talking to me right now if I didn't have an abundance of information that, you know, you were there and you were involved in this, okay? So that's not a question in my mind. So I'm not here to even discuss that part. I'm here to discuss the context. You know what context means? I'm going to Grand, though, you're saying, right? Oh, Grand? Yeah. Dollar General.
Grand is the name of the street.
I haven't been that way, you guys, my mom. Well, it's not a matter of you've been there. You're pretty distinct looking, man. Okay.
Yeah, he's naming his proper name.
Have seen you there before, okay? So, like I said initially, I'm not here to debate whether you were there or not. It's like I know you were there, okay? And I don't want to get up an argument or, like I said.
Thank you. So again, clearly lying. Police are lying to him, saying, I know that you were there, when actually he wasn't there at all. And he had a really full team of basketball players, coaches, people in the stands, everybody who could testify that he was not even in the area. He was on another end of Chicago, which is a huge city. He wasn't even close to where the incident happened, and the officer made it look like, hey, we've already got you, you're already busted, you just need to confess. And at which point, this is a child who was 15 years of age. So from that point on, the context is Illinois, after that, began to create a lot of policies that became very, very clear. They're out there on videos. And so when this one was released, so a breach of ethics, and clearly they were lying to him during the interview, especially for a youth, to have that type of a situation happen. Just lots of youth advocates are now in place, they're developing policies, and there's been lots of change. As a result of this, it is illegal. So for hearing people who have access to language, this is what happens. But imagine a deaf person in that same situation and how pretty horrible that would be. So we do have another case study example. This actually is public information, so the identification and all of that remains. And so this was about 5 years ago, 2019, a man who was with a friend, and he was leaving the house, and the next door neighbor, they were having an argument about something, and the police were called to the neighbor at the same time. The police showed up, he was leaving, and he'd said something, and it looked like they thought he was ignoring, the police thought that this person was ignoring the police, but he didn't know what was going on. He was tased at that point, fell to the ground, and during that time is when his implant fell off, was gone. He had just gotten a cochlear implant within, I don't know, a month or so, and had saved up money to try to get all of this and everything. And so, you know, it takes some time to recover and heal from that procedure. So he was tased, had been arrested, was incarcerated, was in back of the police car by himself, and at some point, they finally realized that he was deaf and let him go. And so I think it's important, again, to realize that, you know, he was wrongly accused and they let him go, but that experience itself, extremely traumatic, you know, and it has long-term implications for how he's going to interact, hang out with friends. It impacts, you know, how he interacts with authority figures moving forward, and just, you know, out there in the community navigating life, highly sensitive, highly aware of his environment moving forward. So, yeah, just, you know, figuring out, we don't have time to go too in depth again for any conversations, but maybe you could just throw out some ideas, or I do encourage you to come up with some ideas of how you could help advocate for change and a more healthy process. Also, restorative practices for this individual, because again, had just gotten the implant, couldn't afford to replace it with a new one. You know, we've got some community resources that are provided to him, but you know, that support, those materials and all that things, that's something that he needed to you know, for his life. Do you want to talk about this slide at all, or do you want to move on to the next slide? Let's go forward in the because of our time. Yep, but please do come up and talk to us again if you need to after our presentation.
I'm committed to giving you guys at least 5 minutes to work together, so I'm going to try to quickly move to the next few slides, okay? So I mentioned before 988, and I don't need to say much more about it, but I do hope that you guys are, you know, examining what are your community 988 resources. Do they have a disability access advisory board? You know, making sure that the people at 988 have some sort of strategies for working with deaf people in crisis is really important. This one's yours.
Okay, let's let you all read that for just a second. Okay, so in my research studies that I did last year, was basically about it's the only published study that has been done about deaf people experiencing incarceration since the time of COVID, since the time of the Black Lives Matter movement, and really just kind of scratches the surface on research when it comes to deaf people being in the prison system. And I have seen myself, I don't know where you can look, but I've never seen articles published about deaf youth in the prison system, incarcerated. Yeah, and there's not a lot of research being done, not a lot of documentation about the impacts that these have on individuals, the impacts that people say, oh, you know, we need to create community resources, we need to develop different programs. But if we don't have the evidence and the research, then as a community, you know, we're having conversations with each other, but having formal evidence, research in place, there's not much we can do. It's important to consider those experiences. Maybe they're not documented, but you know, we don't want to overlook those people. And we want to understand how we can serve a deaf individual who's incarcerated, how that looks different than a hearing person who's incarcerated. Yeah, as far as somebody who might be Muslim or of a different cultural background, or, you know, if they're an immigrant, specific things that they face, all these different factors, that intersectionality that defines a person. So we're not, you know, always, hold on. Sorry. Go back to, Deaf people are not monolithic. There's a variety of deaf people, so we need to consider all the parts of that person. So I think that when we are serving people well, we don't recognize those issues, but I think it's important that if there's nothing wrong, then we don't stop to analyze and take a look at things. I think that oftentimes in the research field, we're saying, oh, well, why does that person end up in prison? But, you know, there's less of a chance of saying, why don't all of these people end up being incarcerated? So I think oftentimes if we can look at those who are not, you know, what is making people be successful? What is helping people be, you know, they have a stable home, they have food, they have opportunities to pursue whatever type of careers they want, or they have access to transportation, et cetera. So lots of things that we can look at that are going right, and then that we take for granted. So we don't always think about, you know, someday, you know, because things are going well, how can we make sure that we replicate some of that and make sure that things are smooth? So we don't oftentimes stop to think. Sometimes we just kind of move through and take things for granted. Do we want to do this one? Okay, maybe we'll give you a minute to take a look at this on your notes, or maybe jot some things down, or on your phone, whatever you'd like to do.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm sorry, we skipped a slide earlier, and I think it's important. So I just want you guys to know that I did a presentation for the Alabama Mental Health Interpreting Institute, 6 hours on this one slide, okay? So I'm gonna try to do it in just maybe 2 or 3 minutes, just touch on these different key points, okay? So these are some of the factors that we find that contribute to this school to prison nexus. Like, this is the intersection of where deaf kids end up having difficulties. And one is cognitive factors, right? Like how, you don't know how many times I've been involved, I go to a court and I look at the assessment that was done by a local person who is hearing and doesn't really understand how to work with deaf people, and they have no idea the cognitive function of this person, but cognitive factors play into it quite a bit. Early childhood experiences, I'm gonna skip over that because we talked a lot about that, you know, before. Language deprivation, clearly, it's not just language deprivation, but also just sort of what goes with that, or academics that are delayed as well. So, you know, when you think about the interactions that a deaf person has with people in the legal system, that piece is so vital, and but yet it's not, you know, it's not, a deaf person has difficulty accessing the system because of language deprivation. Social cognition, like that's what you guys all have right now. You're watching me, you're watching the interpreter. You know, we have the ability to sort of navigate different systems. And when you go into an interaction with law enforcement, you know, make sure that you've got your hands on the wheel, whatever. You've got a way of working with people in different contexts. A lot of deaf kids don't have that strong social cognition. They don't know, you know, when to hold back, when to say something, when not to say something. So that piece is really, you know, challenging for deaf kids. Fund of information. Now this, I think we have lots of clinical evidence on that left side. And here on the right side, we've got clinical evidence too, but fund of information is something that is sort of a theoretical concept that I think we can all agree that we believe in, that we recognize. Just think about it for a second. I don't know if, I mean, we all know that it's good practice to unplug, right? Like, put your cell phone down in the evening, maybe don't watch television for, we've got to relax because we get too much information in our life, right? I mean, you go to the bathroom and sometimes there's newspapers, there's content everywhere you go, right? We are overwhelmed with information. But a lot of deaf kids have exactly the opposite problem. They lack information, just like some of the case examples before, like, oh, I shouldn't go out like in a relationship with somebody who's consenting to me because they're 14 and I didn't know that they couldn't consent to that, right? So there's all kinds of information that you and I have that they do not have, right? And then schooling and education. I'm not trying to be critical of schools, but we talked a little bit earlier about ADA, right? That's the one law that is the most powerful law to protect deaf kids, and how much emphasis are we putting on that in school? I think most of us would say, like, not enough, right? Not enough. And literacy. Do you know that there was a study done of prison handbooks, and that the average handbook is written at the 12th grade level, many of them above the 12th grade? How many people who are going to be able to function in a prison when they can't understand the rules, right? So literacy among our kids is a problem. And they talked about, in the video, when we're going to Mirandize Michelle, we can just write it down. Do you think Michelle's going to understand what they write down? Literacy is a huge issue when it comes to the prison pipeline. And finally, financial reimbursement. Our healthcare system, so psychiatry, psychology, runs on reimbursement, right? And so, but there is no profit in serving a deaf person, because if you're going to serve them well, you should hire signing clinicians, which means that a typical system is going to have full-time interpreters. And even if they didn't have full-time interpreters and signing clinicians, maybe they said, well, we'll just hire when we need a part-time interpreter. 99% of the time, the hospital administration says, that's the cost, get them out. And so their treatment is very short and inappropriate, not very helpful, oftentimes worsens the problem. The system of healthcare, the for-profit system of healthcare that we have in the United States does not help deaf people. So that was 6 hours of content shrunken down to about 2 minutes. So we could certainly expand on all these topics, but if you think about how each of these really impacts deaf kids, as they begin to exacerbate, we add them to, then we can see how the system does not work in ways to help deaf kids. And that's why we see them more at risk of being pushed into that pipeline. Oops, I'm sorry, it was a misplaced slide, so we're gonna go further down. Okay, I think this is the point where we should probably let you guys talk a little bit, 2 or 3 minutes. So we're going to talk about disrupting the systems. And I think this is where we get some good meaty piece. I want you guys to get together with each other. I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes and say, what can you do? What can I do, to disrupt this school-to-prison pipeline? You've heard a lot about some of the problems. What can you do to help change the systems in your communities? So I'm going to maybe give you 2 or 3 minutes to talk with each other at your tables, then we'll come back together, okay?
Okay, everybody, I think we are ready to get back. So nudge each other and let's go ahead and, hey, everybody up here, wrap up your conversation. And we are back.
I could see some of you all talking together, and it looked like you were having good discussions. Our slides are saying we had broken them down, early interventions, what can we do, and then midlife, and then even because I want you guys to know that there are things we can do at every developmental stage, but we don't need to go there because we're almost out of time, so maybe we can get 1 or 2 people to share it. Did you come up with an idea?
We were talking a little bit about how you were mentioning training for police, for example, of how to work with somebody who's deaf. And we were saying, working in public schools, why can't that just be a normal class or, something that you do at school when someone's young? So because as they go through public school or any school, they're going to have classmates who are deaf or visually impaired, for example, and just kind of like normalize that so that, when they're police one day or some other profession, they've already had exposure and know kind of the norms. So
I like that idea. That's not one that I had thought of before. It's wonderful. Somebody, maybe one more.
From Zoom, it's okay?
Sure.
From the educational perspective, we could educate parents about the school-to-prison nexus and provide them with ideas, tools to prepare their child for the realities of the current system. I think parents often don't realize that this is an issue. Also, as educators, we should be part of this community of care and also need to focus on language and literacy as empowerment.
Very well said. Yes. Thank you. One more? Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to go ahead and just take the couple minutes that we have left. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. So just to kind of add here, two things I wanted to mention. Some students, when they're in school, deaf or hard of hearing, they become deaf police, right? I mean, they're like, oh, they're told that they can't. But that's an idea. Maybe they could become a deaf policeman and be a role model and expose other deaf people and just impact the system in that way. The second thought is just in general, like depending on the age, but school-wide, lobbying. So being involved and being active when it comes to legislation, invite police to come and see how they can, communicate and provide access for people. Some states don't have active lobbying in the school. They don't have active interpreting agencies or businesses. And so, work as an ecosystem and all come together and say, hey, we are deaf and hard of hearing, we are deaf blind, and have representation and work with those authority figures. I think it would be nice to have all kinds of people from all different kinds of ages as part of that, and just, really advocate for civil rights and, after graduation when they enter the adult world.
I think it's a great point. I mean, years ago when I was working heavily with CPS, I was really trying to push, interaction of CODAs and other signing parents to become foster parents. We need to be recruiting in a targeted way. And I can see the same thing with law enforcement, trying to get people who are fluent signers, and they should be rewarded. They should be compensated for being bilingual, and encourage people to go, who are CODAs and who are fluent signers to go into the field so that we can have more opportunities for appropriate interaction. Wow. Okay, we have a little left, but I think we probably need to close because
yeah, we do.
It's already 4 o'clock now.
Yeah,
so,
if I could
Grace?
just, yep. I would like to say, just to end my comments with, again, summarize this really briefly, but I think that honestly for myself, the restorative recommendations are, focusing less on police training and all of that, but really think about how can we improve the quality of life and access for deaf people in any area of life, in every community, early access to language, et cetera, and just continued access, work opportunities, safety in the house, in the home, safe relationships, healthy support in the whole community, and just make that whole space where deaf people can thrive. It doesn't mean avoiding the system and avoiding that completely. We can potentially, maybe divert, or we can't necessarily avoid the incarceration system, but look at mental, emotional, physical health, socialization. All these areas need to be met. And then the other systems are in place, and we also have to deal with those. But look at the general, yeah. So just thank you all so much for your comments and for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Please feel free to approach me at any time if you want. There's information for us here, social media, if you want to follow us or reach out. All right, thank you.